My name is Floyd Flippin, and I am in Jackson, Tennessee today, September the 12th, 2006, to interview my friend, Judge Frank Crawford. This interview is taking place as a part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. State your full name and place of birth.
William Frank Crawford, born in Memphis, Tennessee.
Tell me about your parents, their names and what they did and where you grew up.
My father, Charles Richard Crawford, my mother, Mary Louise Lopez. And my mother grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and my father grew up in Shelbina, Missouri, and Memphis, Tennessee, because he moved down when he was probably 10 years old or something like that when they moved.
Where did you grow up in Memphis?
I grew up in Midtown on Walker Avenue at Barksdale.
And how about brothers and sisters?
I have one sister. She's 2 years older than I am, and she's Alice Elizabeth Sways. She's a widow and lives in Olive Branch, Mississippi. Now, she just moved down there last 2 or 3 years ago.
And I meant to ask you your date of birth.
April 2, 1927.
And your sister is
She's
2 years
two
older?
years older, right.
What about your early years? What do you remember about maybe some of the kids in the neighborhood that maybe became lawyers or went on to become successful?
Well, you know, I'm trying to think of any. I don't think there are any of my contemporaries in the neighborhood that became lawyers. I did have later in my early teen years, when I was in the Boy Scouts and things, I had some very nice friends. That one's a CPA, and one was a doctor, and another one was a dentist, and we lived in I guess you'd say, a middle class neighborhood, and it was a little bit. I found it a little bit refreshing to see that a lot of successful people came out of the neighborhood, and so they did do that. But I don't remember a lawyer. I was only one.
How about early influences on your life as far as becoming a success? Who were some of the early influences on your life?
Oh, you mean grammar school, for instance?
Sure.
Well, I went to Peabody Grammar School, and it was up on Young and near Cooper and Young. People that are familiar with that area, they know where that is. And I went there, and I had some people. I had a friend that lived on Young that started in kindergarten with me at that school. Another one that lived on Felix, the next street over from my street, that we started in kindergarten together. And we ended up through high school and in later years after military service and after college, we kept up and were friends. The one was a dentist. He was my dentist. Another was a real estate man, for instance. Now, where I live now, down the street from me, is a friend that he was a retired CPA that lived in the neighborhood, and he's a businessman too. I mean, I said retired, but he owns several businesses.
And who is that, Judge?
Jack Ivey. His brother, Fred Ivey, was a lawyer. You may know him. He was a lawyer in Memphis.
I do.
He's retired now. And Jack was in the scout troop and lives down there. And then I had another doctor that lived down there that was my neighbor 1 block away growing up. It just moved out in the country.
And who was that?
Jack Halford.
And you've told me before that your Uncle Frank, I think you were named for him, is that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what type of influence did he have on you?
Well, he was, my Uncle Frank, a lot of this, of course, has been told to me too, but my family, or my father's family, lived in Shelbina, Missouri, and my grandfather was a mule trader. And my Uncle Frank became a mule trader too, and he was quite good at it, I understand. And they after he and my Uncle Frank was about 18 or 19 years older than my father. And so when my father's father died, when he was at an early age, Uncle Frank actually became like his father. And he became the patriarch of the family. And they had 3 or 4 aunts, and they all moved from Shelby County, Missouri, to Shelby County, Tennessee.
Oh, man.
And that's how they located in Memphis.
And lived close to you? And you
Well, they lived over in North Memphis when they moved here, and then my mother and father met when her family moved here from Birmingham. My grandfather was with the paper and with Commercial Appeal, and they moved here, and she was a secretary for the dictaphone company, and my father worked there at the dictaphone company, and they met each other then, and one thing led to another, and they got married. So,
I know you went on to high school. Where did you go to high school?
Central High School in Memphis.
And at some point in time, the war began. And how old were you when
Well,
World
I was
War II
in Fairview Junior High School at that time, and I'm guessing I was in the 9th grade. I think I was.
And what effect did that war beginning have on you?
Oh, a great effect. I wanted to get in it.
And what do you mean you wanted to get in?
Well, I wanted to go. Of course, I couldn't. There's no way I could. And so my folks, of course, wouldn't agree to let me get out and sign up until I would finish school.
What did it require for you to get out and to sign up before you were, say, 17?
You had to have parents' permission.
Did you talk to them about that?
Oh, yeah. They said, finish school, we'll sign up, for sure. But not at finish school.
What did you do as soon as you finished high school?
As soon as I finished high school, I tried my best to get called to active duty because I had joined the reserve, and I wrote a bunch of letters and all that. I don't know how many. And finally, I was able to go on my 18th birthday. I guess it was 2 or 3 days before my 18th birthday.
And what branch of service?
I went into the Army. I was signed up as a paratrooper and took a paratrooper physical in Fort McPherson, Georgia. And then I took basic training at Fort Gordon, or Camp Gordon at the time, Georgia. And then I went from there to the parachute school in Fort Benning, Georgia.
How did you choose the paratrooper school?
I just liked the paratroopers. I guess I saw the young man that came to the school to visit, and he had those pretty boots on. I guess I guess that's what it was. But at any rate, I did, and I enjoyed the Army. I really did enjoy it. What
did you do as a paratrooper?
Well, you mean in training?
Yes.
Training was they sent us to an area called what they call the frying pan area down at Fort Benning. It was in the summer, and the first week they have 4 stages of the parachute school. The first stage is called A stage, and that's all day, morning to night, of physical exercise, physical training, and the whole week. And then the second week, B stage, you would do physical training part of the day, and then you would start doing some mock jumping out of mock planes and things of that nature, and then they also had what they call the 34-foot tower, where they had a mock plane and they had a harness on you. You'd jump out and the cables would take you down. And then in the C stage was when you also did physical training, and you learned how to pack parachutes part of the time, because you had to pack your own when you started jumping in class, And and then they had the 250-foot towers, which you've probably seen, where they pull you up and then let you go. Then D stage is where you jump every day and finish that week, and then you get your wings. And then as soon as that's over, they had what they call advanced training.
Did you do that?
you go to the Alabama area, and that's when you would jump with full equipment and arms, and you'd have mock things of that nature, you know. And it lasted 2 weeks. That's generally what it is. And then they changed the name. It was the parachute school when I went, and after it was after the war ended, they changed the name of the school to the Airborne School, and they also they had glider training too at that time.
What about your first night? I believe you had a itching incident.
Well, I left when I left home at night that day. It was on the train, and of course I was by myself to go. Nobody else from Memphis, and I guess you'd say probably a little bit homesick too, just starting out. And so we went from Memphis to Atlanta to Fort McPherson. So I got there. It was late in the evening, and I went over to the orderly room to report. And he said, "Okay, I'll put you up in the barracks there." And so he did. And so I got up there, and I turned the light out to go to sleep. And as soon as I did that, I started scratching all over, man. I was just itching like terrible. So I finally turned the lights on, and it stopped. And so I went down to the orderly room, and it's happened 2 or 3 times. And I said, "Man, I tell you what," I said, "something's the matter with that room up there." I said, I just something's biting me. I said, "Itching all over." "Oh," he said, "those bed bugs are back again." And so that was my initial time when I went in there, and it didn't help me any to be homesick and have bed bugs.
I guess it didn't. And you, what were your thoughts when you went into the Army? Was it a career move for you or a temporary?
No, I didn't think about it being a career at the time. No, I just wanted to go. I had friends that were about a year older than I, and they were gone, and I just couldn't stand being on the sidelines, and I wanted to go, and so that's what I did when I could.
What was it like to jump off a 240-foot tower? Were you scared?
Well, you certainly have some apprehension a little bit, I think, but it was. Frankly, I kind of enjoyed it. I look back on it. At the time, I didn't care for it too much, I guess, but when the time came to jump from the planes, it wasn't as bad as the tower, really. That 34-foot tower with the cables and all is kind of a touchy thing because you don't know whether the cable's going to hold or not, and that's a pretty good drop to the ground. So I liked the plane better than that.
They dropped the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, and how does that affect your stay in the Army?
Well, at the time when I finished the training, we were kind of sitting around, hurry up and wait, you know, that type thing in the Army, waiting to go to the West Coast to join an airborne division for the invasion of Japan. And we were waiting to go, and then they dropped that bomb. So everything was put on hold, and then they, instead of getting to be lucky and sent there and perhaps see some of the world, they reassigned me to the airborne school in the 501st Parachute Infantry Battalion. And so I stayed at Fort Benning from then on until I was discharged in 1946, in October 46.
Any thought at that time about staying in the military, or where were you thinking?
Well, no, actually, I did think about OCS, Officer Candidate School, and staying in, and then I decided no, I was going to get out, because about that time is about in somewhere in that period I began thinking about the law for some reason, and I can't tell you why, but decided I wanted to go to law school, and that's when I made the decision to do that. And so I was anxious to get out and get started back in school.
I know you've had time to reflect on, again, why you chose the practice of law, but anything stand out as we look back?
No, I can't think of anything. For some reason, I wanted to I just felt like I wanted to do something that would be a service, and I thought that would really be good. I don't think I could have been a doctor because I couldn't stand to do that. So I said I believe I could do this, and that's what I wanted to do.
Now you're ready to go to college in the fall of '46, but
right.
What happened to you as far as entering in the fall of '46?
Well, I was accepted at UT, but it was in January that they started.
January of '47?
Yeah, and so I was there at home, and I didn't have anything to do and wanted to do something. And Union University in Jackson they were on a quarter system that started right at the end of October, somewhere in there. And so I thought, well, I'll just go to school there until summer, and then next fall I'll go back to UT.
Had anybody in your family been to Union before you?
Well, I had an uncle that went there, and that's what I think he probably suggested you ought to check Union, and you might like it. And so I did. That's what I did, and I did like Union. It was a nice small school, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that when summer came, that next summer I stayed up there in school for the summer, and so I went a full quarter in the summer, and then in '47, that was in '47, and then in the fall of '47, and I was just messing around, I guess, and I decided I was going to go out for football up at Union, just for the heck of it, so meet some girls, and things of that nature, and so I did. I was up there early for football practice. And so I was there when the freshmen came in. And so when the freshmen came in, I went over along with some of my buddies over to the girls' dormitory to see what the freshmen looked like, And sure enough, there was this tall, blonde-headed girl that came in there. And I had my eye on her right then. And that's the one I've been married to for 7 years.
All right. Who are some of the players on the team that you on Union's team?
Well, Jack Brown was one, and you probably remember Jack.
I do.
He moved here later on, and Jack worked for the paper here. Gosh, I can't think of his name now. And
did you meet Fred Baker?
Ray House. Fred Baker was on the team. Ray House.
Buddy Patey?
Cole, Peyton. Now, Peyton finished the year before.
Okay.
But I knew Buddy very well. Nice fella. But I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that too. They beat me up badly as a meatball, but it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the trips and things of that nature.
Well, back to Lucy. Lucy Scott, I believe, is
right. Mm-hmm.
And where was Lucy from?
She was from Pensacola, Florida.
And how in the world did she get to?
Well, her father and the dean at Union were cousins, and she also had an aunt in Humboldt, and she had another aunt that was assistant registrar at Union. So they decided she wanted to go up there to school, and of course the aunt in Humboldt being there was real close, so that's how she came up there. And they brought her over that night from Humboldt, the two aunts they had up there, and I happened to be out there at the dormitory, and I helped them unload the luggage.
Well, I guess your plan about joining the football team to meet girls worked out.
It worked out very well, it sure did.
And you stayed in Union and ended up graduating in 3 years, is that right?
Well, I didn't graduate. I took the pre-law course, and I had 3 years of pre-law. And then I went to UT. I was accepted at the law school there in 1948, in the fall of '48.
Tell me about the application process for law school back then. First of all, how many schools did you apply to?
Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt and UT. And Vanderbilt, I was accepted both places. And but Vanderbilt, was on a semester system. Tennessee at that time was on a quarter system, and I liked the quarter system.
And why was that?
Because it's shorter time to get your grades, you know. So I like that. So that's why I picked UT. But I remember writing, sending the application in. I remember getting a letter, and I still have that letter, from Elvin Overton, was the secretary of the law school, and said I'd been accepted to enroll in the fall session at UT, and I was thrilled to death when I got that.
So you're going to be a lawyer, and you're going to go to UT Law School. What was the law school like when you got there?
Well, it was up Old Tennessee Hall, up on Cumberland, and I'm pointing like I know where it is. I may be pointing the wrong direction, but it's up at Tennessee Hall. It's up on Cumberland by the Church Street Methodist Church, and it was very crowded at the time because veterans were there, and we took a lot of classes over in the Church Street Sunday School department, and I had a lot of classes over there. But it was, I really enjoyed law school. I was scared to death the first quarter, no question about it. It's so different. But after I got used to it, I really enjoyed being in law school.
You had a GI Bill for the Union service, but wasn't it about to play out in law school?
Well, I used the GI Bill foolishly for undergraduate and all but the last year of law school, and then it ran out. And I wish now I'd saved it from then, but my dad helped me. And then I also, Walter Garland was a professor at UT and was the law librarian. And so the first year I was there, George Thomas was a lawyer's lawyer up here in Dresden. You may know him.
Yes.
And George worked in the law library, and he was graduating. And Walter hired me. And that was about the time my GI Bill was going to run out.
What did you do?
In the law library?
Yes, sir.
Oh, well, you ran the thing really because we kept it open at night and 2 until 9 o'clock, and you there to get books and we had to do some reference work. People would call from various places, you know, and ask you to look up something, and we'd do it, and it was the best job in the world for a law student because you could study, and that was a great job. I didn't pay any money to speak of. I think 50 cents an hour or something like that. I think that was the pay, I believe. But it sure was nice to be able to study.
And who were some of your early classmates that you met when you started law school?
Oh, goodness.
You mentioned George Thomas.
Well, George
Had
wasn't a
graduated.
classmate. He was an upperclassman and leaving, and really a principal fellow. I'm crazy about George. And he helped me a lot when I started because he trained me in the library. But I had, in school was Herbert Bacon from Morristown, John Ayers from Knoxville. You may know some of that family.
Yeah. Yes.
Ben Williamson, John Burnett.
Well, I know on the way up here today you called Herbert Bacon, so I know you all still.
I called Herbert today. I could not think of the name of one of my favorite professors of it. Couldn't think of his last name. Yeah. And so I said, well, dadgummit, I'll call Herbert and find out. So he remembered that name. Then he didn't think of a couple other names that I thought of.
There you go.
So I said, we're on the same wavelength here now.
At some point, the law school moves from where it is to where it currently is, and when was that?
It was in the spring of 1950.
What do you remember about the move?
Well, in the meantime, Walter Garland, who had been the law librarian and professor, left and went back to his hometown in Irwin, Tennessee, where he later was a circuit judge and a very fine judge. And after he left, they hired Martin Feerick, who was the law librarian and a professor, and he was from Upper New York State. And Martin came there, and he had some illness, and I can't remember what it was, but I remember he was out a good bit when he first got there. A great fellow, and we became very fast friends because I didn't have him for a class. So he taught only freshman classes, and I didn't have a class, so we became very good friends, and I used to go to his house. Lucy, after we married, in fact, I guess he came after Lucy and I had married, I guess. Anyway, we would go out there for listen to the Vol games on the radio, and Miss Farrick would fix something to eat, and all that. We had a great time with them. But he came up there, and he was ill during this time, and we had to move. The law school was ready out there, and they wanted to move. So I had Fred Astley and Ray Mosley. I don't know whether you remember Ray Mosley from Chattanooga. They had started working in the library with me, and so we got together, and we had the carpenter shop at the university make boxes the same size as the bookshelves, and that's where we would move the books. We would put them in a whole box full, move it, get in the shelf down at the new law school and put them up. So anyway, we accomplished the move, and Mr. Farrick didn't have to worry about it.
I see. Well, I neglected September 3, 1949. Does that date mean anything to you?
Yes, sir.
What was that?
That was the day that I got married. I remember very well.
And where did you get married to Lucy?
In Humboldt, Tennessee, First Methodist Church.
And we've talked about this before today. You had met her at Union,
right?
But you were in law school. How were you going to afford to have a wife in law school?
After we became engaged, which we did in the spring of '48, I guess it was. Yeah, spring of '48. She left Union and went back to Pensacola, and I came to Knoxville, and she left to go back to Pensacola to make some money, so we'd be able to get married. So she went to work, but she didn't make any money, and so that's a long story. But anyway, she was there, and I was in law school in Knoxville. And of course, I wanted to see her, and so the first month of 6 weeks of school, they had a teachers' meeting that they usually, I guess they still do that, and had a Friday holiday. And I decided I was going to go down and see her, and so I started hitchhiking from Knoxville down to Pensacola, and I got down to Auburn, Alabama. It was nighttime. And I checked at the bus station, and they had a bus that would leave the next morning out of there to go to Pensacola. So I went over to the ATO house, my fraternity in Knoxville, and I said, I'd like to have a place I could kind of rest. And of course, they were very kind and let me do that. And I stayed there, and then I caught the bus and went to Pensacola, and got down there and surprised her. She was surprised as she could be. And I stayed until Sunday, and her father put me on a train and sent me back. And he paid that, and I did that 2 or 3 other times. He always sent me back.
So you get married and you move to Knoxville. Where do you first live? And tell me about your...
Well, when we got married in Humboldt, we got married in the morning, and I have to tell you, my family was crazy about Lucy, and Lucy's family liked me, I think. But neither one of the families wanted us to get married because they were afraid I would not finish school. And of course, Lucy's father was also old-fashioned, and he said the idea of somebody wanting to marry my daughter and not even working, well, that made a little difference too. But anyway, we decided we were going to get married when we did, and so Lucy's aunt and all of them in Humboldt, they arranged for us to have a wedding there, and in the morning on that. It was a Saturday morning, Labor Day weekend, and my dad had let me have his car, and so there was no hostility or anything. It just They just were not very happy about it. My sister did come up and attend the wedding. So anyway, after we got married, we left that morning after the wedding and drove to Knoxville to look for a place to live, for school. And so we finally found a place up there after a couple of days, and went back to Memphis, and time to leave to come back to school.
Where was your first residence in Knoxville as a married couple?
It was on East 5th, and I can't remember that address, something 400 something East 5th, and it was an old house that they had built into apartments, and it was really an old house. I mean, really, but it was nice. We had a couple lived downstairs, was fairly young. They were older than we were, but they were a young couple, and had a couple of children, and they were. He was with TVA, I remember, and then there was another couple upstairs. There was a student and his wife. So we enjoyed being there, but we wanted to be back out at the campus, and so I had applied for the veterans housing and was on the waiting list out there, and was able to move the first of the year, the next year.
Did Lucy become employed?
Yes, she got a job with the telephone company, and she was a teller. She started out as a teller, and then she was a service representative.
And you mentioned Veterans Village. Where was Veterans
Well,
Village?
they had two. They had one on the hill, believe it or not, and they had those trailers all around the hill. But I wanted to be in that one. I would have liked it because it was closer. But I was out there near the ag school, and now it's where I believe it's where that bridge goes over to go to Maryville. You know.
What was the housing like out there?
Well, these were old Oak Ridge trailers that they used when they constructed Oak Ridge, and they were old trailers. But it was nice. They had bathhouses, strategically located. I mean, they were okay. You didn't have to go very far.
So you had community bathrooms?
Yeah, they had and we had in the trailer itself. We had only had cold water. They had no hot water.
How big was the trailer?
Well, the first one I had was hardly as long as this table. I mean, it was a little bit longer, maybe, but not much. And you had to fold down the kitchen table to make a bed and sleep. But the second one I got at that first quarter, oh, that was nice, man. It was double that size. And I could slide my shoes on the floor and all that, and I really liked that. But it was nice, but it was a very primitive living in that we had ice boxes, and you'd have ice delivered, you know, and you put it in there. And when the weather got real cold, which it did frequently in Knoxville, it would freeze the drain pipe on your refrigerator or your ice box, and the water would drain out sometimes when it would start and get on the floor of the trailer, and we'd wake up in the morning and there would be ice on the floor. You'd be walking on ice. So it had its drawbacks, but you know, I told Lucy, I said, you know, we were probably the healthiest we've ever been in our lives, and we had more fun because on Saturday, we didn't have a car, and we'd walk down from that village down. There was a white store. I don't know whether they still have white stores there or not, but it was a white store down on Cumberland, starting up the hill. And we'd go down there, and I'd get 2 big sacks of groceries and walk up that hill with those groceries on Saturday morning, you know. And so it was, I said, we had a great time.
What kind of income did you have?
Well, she worked, and I worked at the law library, and didn't make much money. But neither one of us made much money, but we had enough to live on. And then my dad paid my tuition and helped me financially, which was very nice, and I appreciated that. So we didn't have any debts or anything to speak of.
Did you have a desire as you got toward graduation from law school to return to Memphis, your hometown?
Absolutely. You couldn't drive me away from Memphis at that time, and not that I feel that way now. Memphis has changed so much, but I wanted to go back to Memphis.
What about the interview? Did they have a placement?
No,
department?
they didn't. If they did,
how did the law school graduate get a job?
Well, if they did have a placement, I didn't know about it, and I don't think they did. I think you're just going out, and at that time it was really tough to get a job.
What do you mean?
Well, the market had been flooded with lawyers, for one thing, because of all the influx of the veterans, in law school, and it had the market was a seller's market. I mean, the people that had the offices, they were the ones that could call the shots, and you would have terrible time. But I had this. My dad had a friend that was a lawyer there, and his practice had changed, so he thought he could use somebody, and so I had a job with him.
And what was that firm?
Church and Church, and it was primarily probate and real estate and that type of work, which didn't really interest me, but I wanted a job, and so I took the job at $100 a month. That's what it was.
$100 a month.
$100 a month, and
How
I
about
thought
401k and retirement plan,
no,
things like?
nothing. For $100 a month, and so I would go in the morning in January of that year, of 1951, at 6 o'clock in the morning, and study for the bar until 9. I didn't have a bar review course, and I don't even know whether they had one then or not, to tell you the truth. But I studied for the bar all during January and up until the time I've forgotten whether it was February or the end of January when they had the bar, but I studied, and so anyway, I did that, and I learned a lot about real estate law at that time.
Did you have a vehicle when you graduated from law school?
No, I didn't have a vehicle for a long time. We had, after I moved back to Memphis, after that, Lucy was able to transfer with the telephone company here, or in Memphis, and we had an apartment over on Parkway near the fairgrounds, if you know where that is.
Sure.
It's called the Jemison Apartments, and I think everybody in Memphis that I grew up with lived in the Jemison Apartments at one time or another. So we lived there, and I had another friend of mine from UT that lived there also, and he was with the Chamber of Commerce, and his wife worked at Light, Gas, and Water, but they had a car. So they took Lucy to work every morning, and then we brought a little dog back with us from Knoxville, Prissy. One of Lucy's co-workers had the puppies there, and so I had Prissy, and so I would take Prissy every morning and walk from the apartment to my mother's house and leave the dog, and she kept the dog for us, and it was about 2 miles, I guess, over there from our apartment to her house. And then I'd come back in the evening, and I usually I'd ride the bus home to her house, and then my dad would usually drive me home. But we did that all that time.
Well, when you your first job was Church and Church in Memphis. What about dress? What type of dress were you required to?
Well, we had to wear a tie and a coat in the wintertime, but in the summer we didn't go to court that much, and so we kept a coat hanging on a hanger in there, and if somebody had to run up to probate court or city court or something like that, they'd grab that coat and put it on. We'd just wear a shirt and tie. It was so hot because it was hot up there, And
was it a communal coat?
Yeah, oh yeah, it was an old coat. I don't remember. It was kind of some kind of cord coat, I think.
What type of work did you do at Church and Church?
Well, I learned a lot about real estate law and probate law, which served me well in later times because I didn't have a little knowledge of it, and that's mostly what I did was check titles and learn how to examine titles and how to handle real estate closings and things of that nature. And it had a big building boom at that time in Memphis, and he had a world of clients that builders that we had a subdivision after subdivision going,
What do you remember about fees that you were able to generate from the work?
Oh boy, fees at that time, of course, were pretty low. I don't remember exactly, but it seemed to me like a fee for drawing a warranty deed was $15 or something like that, and closing maybe $10 for each person or something like that. It was something. I'll tell you a story about that. I was making $100 a month, and Lucy was working, and so there was a lawyer right across the hall from us, and
Who was
he
that?
was his name was Howard Pritchard. He was an older lawyer, of course, and he a real estate lawyer. So he came over there one day and he asked me. He said, "Look, I want to try to take." We worked on Saturday, incidentally, at that time, at least a half a day. And he said, "I wanted to take off this Saturday to do something." And he said, "I've got a closing I must do on Saturday, but said if you will handle that for me, I will draw all the papers and let you have all the fees." And I said, "Oh boy, I'd be glad to do that, you know." And so I said, "Man," I called Lucy up. I said, "Man, we're gonna go out to dinner probably Saturday night. Man, we're gonna have some." So anyway, on Friday, I told my boss, I said, "Boy, Mr. Pritchard came over here and said he wanted me to handle his closing for him, so I could have all the fees." He said, "Oh, that's good." He said, "Just turn them into Miss Margaret." I said, "Okay."
What happened to the dinner?
Well, we didn't have the dinner. But that's just an example of how things were at the time. As I told you earlier, I can't remember who it was, but it was one of my contemporaries at the time. We would get together and have coffee and talk about how hard it was to make a living, you know, at that time. And I was talking to somebody about going with them, you know, having the place. And so the lawyer said, "Well," he said, "I don't know." He said, "I get about $75 a month, about all I can do." And the guy said, "Golly, that's not very much," but I said, "I'll take it." He said, "Oh, no," he said, "that's what we're going to charge you for the office."
For rent?
Yeah. So anyway, things were tough then.
You're there at Church and Church, and you've got this real estate practice. What about the office itself? Air conditioning? How did you?
No. He had a window air conditioner in there in one office, two offices, I guess. But it was a very Spartan office. The only thing it had was a big walk-in vault. Because Mr. Roy Church, the older church, was well known in Arkansas and Mississippi. He was probably the most knowledgeable title lawyer in that part of the country, and he had been around for years and years and handled foreclosures during the Depression and all that. And he had a lot of big clients that he did work for on estates and also the real estate. Millionaire type clients he had. But he had this walk-in vault, and he kept a lot of things for them in that vault. But it was a Spartan office. I mean, it was so Spartan that one of the offices had a little cutout in here with a telephone in it, and the secretary would answer that telephone, and it was also for that office. So that tells you a little bit about what type of office it was. But
how'd you make copies back then of documents?
Copies were made by the secretary typing and putting copy on the page. Then in fact, in that office, we didn't have a copy machine at all. Everything's carbon copies. You'd have carbon, and that was terrible in the summertime. You'd put your hand down or your arm down on the desk or something, and it'd all be black with carbon paper and print on you, and it was kind of tough in those days. And then the ceiling fan on, you had to hold everything down on your desk. So it wasn't a picnic in those days.
Well, you and Lucy are married, and you expecting your first child, your son.
Right. When I got that news, I knew that her time working was going to be very short, and my time at $100 a month was getting shorter and shorter. And
what'd you do?
so I started thinking about getting a job somewhere to make some money, and and as a matter of fact, I talked to Herbert Bacon, my roommate in law school. He's a lawyer up in Morristown. I think you knew that.
Yes.
Anyway, and he had gone with TVA as a lawyer, and he said, "Well, look," he said, "I want you to let me call John D. Rather, who was his boss at TVA, who was also a lawyer, and from Tuscumbia, Alabama." And he said, "I think there may be an opening, and I'm gonna call and see." They had one of their lawyers had just been involved in an automobile accident and was killed about a month or so before that. He told me, I didn't know that. And so I did, and so Mr. Rather called me and said he'd like to interview me. And so I went over to, at that time, my dad had let me have enough money to buy a used car, and I had an old Ford, a 1940 Ford or something, I think it was. And I had to be over there to interview in the morning. And I remember going to Chattanooga, had to go to Chattanooga, that's where the office was. And Lucy couldn't go because she was working. So my mother said, "Well, you can't go by yourself, so I'm going to ride with you." So my mother rode over there with me. She wouldn't let me drive by myself. And so I drove over there all night and got in early in the morning and had the interview. And they hired me. And,
What type of, did we get an increase in pay?
Oh boy, let me tell you what, I thought I was on the high cotton then, man. I'm telling you, it was great. Cause I wasn't used to that kind of money. Yeah, they very good. It was a great job. And this man, John D. Rather, was just a prince. And his boss was Lou Connor, who was Lou Connor, the judge, later,
Yes.
father. Lewis Connor, I think is what they called him. But Mr. Rather, when he knew that Lucy was expecting, and so I was sent, where I was working was in North Mississippi, down in Macon, Mississippi. And so he arranged, he said, "Look," he said, "it's getting time for your baby." He said, "I've got some work over in Arkansas I want you to do. You got to locate these heirs and get them to sign these deeds." And they're over near Lone Oak and Little Rock in that area. And said, "You can drive over there in the morning and come back every afternoon. You'd be home when you have to go to the hospital." I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. Mm-hmm. That's what I did.
What did you do for TVA? You mentioned finding heirs. What else did you
Well,
do?
I had a secretary. Each lawyer had a secretary, and we were responsible to see that secretary got to where we had to go. And we'd go in the courthouse, and they would furnish us an office. And we would, if they were building a transmission line from Macon, Mississippi to Louisville, Mississippi, they would furnish us an office, and the engineers would furnish us plats. And then we would examine the title, draw up the papers, and try to settle the case if we could. And sometimes condemnation cases were filed because they wouldn't sell, But that's the way it worked, and it was a great job, man. And it's typical government work. I hate to say this, but you start off, and I was working, and I was told by some other people, said, "You're going too fast, don't want to do that much at this time." But I mean, it was really a good job, I say. And I enjoyed it, but then I still wanted to practice law.
And how long did you stay with the TVA?
I was there about 2 years or something like that.
And then 2 years later, I believe you get a telephone call from Colonel Harold Warner of the UT Law School.
Yeah, he was I believe he might have been the dean. He still was the assistant dean, I think, at that time. And he said that he knew I wanted to practice law. I'd been, in touch with him, talked to him. And he said that Henderson, Tennessee, they had a lawyer that had just died down there, and another one had gone into the service, I think he said. And he said, "It looks like it'd be a good place for you to go." In fact, Alan Pruitt, Tom Pruitt's older brother, was a judge, was a lawyer in Bolivar, and he's the one that told him about that. And he said, looks like he thinks it'd be a good deal for you to go up there. So I went and looked at it, and I told Lucy, that's a big step. I said, you know, we're going to give up a good salary and all that, but you want to do it? She said, let's try it. So we did.
Did you have a partner with you when you started?
Yeah, Ed Brown was my classmate at UT, and he was with. Well, at that time, he had been with Travelers Insurance, but he was with another lawyer there that did claim work, and he was doing adjusting work. And he wanted to go. He said, I want to go too. And so I said, well, come on, we'll all go. And so he had one child, and so all six of us went up there.
Well, had you ever been to Henderson before?
Never had been to Henderson, but I had. Now, when I was at Union, I had a roommate during the summer, Roy Smith, who retired now. He was an oral surgeon. He was from Henderson, and I knew of it. I think I've been maybe down to once or twice down to his house. That's about it.
And Henderson's about how far from Jackson?
Oh, 15 miles, not far.
When you went to assess Henderson, did you talk to any lawyer there or just look at the town?
I did not talk to a lawyer there that I can remember on that first visit. Now, I talked to one later. Cecil Anderson was the lawyer there, still there, and a very fine person. And but I can't remember. I didn't talk to a lawyer there. They didn't have, but I think Cecil might have been the only one there. Thinking about it.
So you open up the firm in Henderson.
Right.
What do you do? What type of practice do you have?
Well, just anything that would walk in the door, and did a little work for the bank. Did some real estate work for the bank, and then I had a first big trial was a murder case that I tried in Henderson, it lasted about 3 days. And Tip Taylor was a judge and one of the finest persons I've ever known. And I tried that case, and George, it's a funny thing about that case too. I'll tell you, it's kind of I thought a real interesting story. George, can't think of his last name now, but anyway, he came to me and he didn't have any money, and he needed a lawyer. He'd been indicted and all that, and I said, well, okay. I said, I'll handle it. He said, well, I want to tell you. He said, my son is in Korea, and said I've got some more bonds that his name's on, and he'll cash those things, and when he gets home, and pay you at least what they are. And it was, I've forgotten how much it was, but it was about maybe $900,000, something like that. And I said, okay. I said, I'll be fine. So I did. I took the case, and as I said, I had not tried any major cases at that time, but I studied hard. And so Miss Bessie Johnson was she was a clerk in this court.
In the Court of Appeals?
Deputy clerk later, but at the time she was a court reporter. And Miss Bessie was the court reporter for that area, and so I hired her for the trial. And so after the trial was over, George said he wanted to appeal. He was convicted of manslaughter, which was not bad. So he wanted to appeal, though, because we had a pretty 2 or 3 evidentiary problems that I thought were pretty good. Anyway, so I remember Miss Bessie called me and she said, well, do you want any copies of this record? I'd ordered the record, and I said, yeah, give me a couple. And I didn't know what it cost or anything else, you know. And so she did, and I had a 3 or 4 day trial record and several copies, and it was, oh man, I've forgotten how much. Well, I had to pay that. I didn't have any money. He didn't have any money. So I had to pay for that. And so anyway, I did that. And so George went on to the pen, and I fixed the brief. And I went by to see him one day on my way to Knoxville. As a matter of fact, I was going up to a game. and I stopped by and took him a carton of cigarettes. He said, you know, he said, it's not real bad here, and they tell me that I'm going to get out of here in about 6 months. He said, I don't drop that appeal. And I said, whatever you want to do. So that's what I did. Well, after that, and I don't know how long it was after it, I was in my office, and this guy came in the front door, and he said, I'm so-and-so, and whatever George's last name was, and I can't, it slips me right now. And he said, my father asked me to come by here and sign these war bonds over to you. And this guy, this was a long time after that, and he came by and did that, and I got back. I didn't make any money and probably lost some for what I'd paid out, but at least he came back, and but that's human nature. That's good.
Sure.
So I was really pleased.
How long did you stay in Henderson?
Well, before I left Memphis, I had applied with Lowell Taylor. Taylor and Quick was the name of the firm at the time, and they didn't have anything opening at all. And so Bill McLean was a lawyer there, that a friend of mine that I had met after I started practicing. And so after I was in Henderson, and Bill called me one day and he said that they had an opening now, and said, Mr. Taylor said he'd like to talk to you if you're still interested in coming to Memphis. Well, by that time we were ready to move and go back to Memphis. And so I went down there and interviewed with him, and he hired me, and we moved back to Memphis. And I've been there since.
How about taking a break?
Yeah, that's fine.
Judge, we're in 1955, and you're in Henderson, Tennessee. You have applied for a job with Lowell Taylor before you came to Henderson, and you have this desire to go back to Memphis, and you get a telephone call from Mr. Taylor. Tell me about that phone call and what happened after that.
Well, Bill McLean in his office called and said that he decided he was going to need somebody now, and if I was still interested, he'd like to talk to me.
Was Bill working for Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, he was with him then. And so I went down there, and in fact, the day I went down to see him, he was ill. He'd stayed at home, and we went out to his house. Bill and I went out to his house, and he interviewed me there.
And do you remember if you had any trouble making a decision about going to work for him when you were offered the job?
No, not at all. I think he offered me the job, I believe, that day. And I said, I think I'll take it.
What was it about the job that intrigued you?
Well, he was going to pay me a living wage. It wasn't a lot, but I could live on it until I could do better. And so that interested me because I wanted to get back into the practice, and I liked the practice he had. He had a very just a varied practice. He represented a lot of corporations, and he represented a lot of insurance companies, and so he had a lot of litigation, and he also had a lot of office practice. And,
what do you mean by office practice?
Well, on he had some small corporations that he did the minutes and things of that nature for, and all the contracts, and he had some larger ones. He did a lot of that. He was the most versatile lawyer I've ever known.
What type of reputation did he have?
Oh, he had a great reputation for his ability. He was probably recognized as one of the best lawyers in Memphis, without any question. And he was so versatile. I mean, he could handle any kind of case.
And you took the job, and what do you remember about the first couple of days of your job?
Well, I don't remember much about the first couple of days. We represented city stores out of Philadelphia, one client. That's just one client, and they had Lowenstein's department store, Bree's department store, and then they built Lowenstein's East, Lowenstein's South, Lowenstein's Home Service. Franklin Simon was city stores too. So we had all those. They were clients, and we had to deal with those people daily. And they all had insurance with New Amsterdam Casualty Company, and that was a client of ours. So as a result, we were busy all the time dealing with them, and I investigated falls and everything else that would happen at the store, you know. And I remember we had over at Lowenstein's uptown, which is now Brinkley Plaza, if y'all have been there.
Yes.
Well, that was Lowenstein's department store. They had a nurse over there, Miss Bess Sims, I remember, great big lady, and she was just tough as nails, I'm telling you. And one of the fellows that had been in Taylor's office, boy, he was scared to death of her at the time. He told me later he was. But I got along with her very well, and she liked me too, and for some reason. And she would call me up, and she said, somebody's falling over here, and you get to come over here right away. And I'd run over there, you know. And one time I remember somebody was in the ladies' room over there, and some plaster fell out of the ceiling and hit somebody in the head. And so she called me, and she was just in a tizzy and said, you got to get over here. And so I said, all right, I'll come over there. And so I came over, and so they had a ladies' lounge, you know, with nice chairs and so forth in there. And I never had been in there before. And so anyway, she comes walking in the door. Here she comes and says, all right, everybody out, the lawyer's coming. All right, and of course I was greatly embarrassed about that, but that's just some of the stories.
I know there was a lot of times, or several times, that Mr. Taylor would call you at odd hours. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, yeah, Lowell, he had a great mind, and he would think of things at very odd times. And one of the things he would do is at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, if he had a thought about a case that we were working on, he would call me and say, Frank, he said, I just thought about so-and-so. Meet me in the law library in 30 minutes.
What time of night would this be?
At 1, 2, 3 o'clock. It didn't make a difference. Lucy will tell you, boy, she oh man. And I'd have to get up and go. I said, okay, I'll go. And so I would go and meet with him, and we'd work and maybe till 6, 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock. And so it's the way he was. But you know, you learn a lot doing that. And that's the way he was, and I don't regret it at all.
You also tried some cases with him. Tell me about some of those cases that.
Oh, I did. Mr. Taylor was, as I said, he was really just so nice to me, and he had. I wish you could take the members of the Memphis bar that had gone through his office in the years past, and I mean, really big name lawyers, and it had gone to Jim Watson, Harry Laughlin, Larry Creason, and different ones. He was really a mentor, but he had one problem, a real bad problem, and that was alcohol. And he would go for a year, not touch anything, but if he touched it, he'd be out for about 6 weeks, and that was a big problem. So as I went on with him, I had one occasion. He had a case up there. He tried in circuit court. He had tried a case for 4 days, and had finished all the proof, and they had nothing left but the oral argument. And it was a plaintiff's case, which is rather unusual for me. And I was not that familiar with the case. I had helped him get it ready and fix the declaration, which at that time was the initial pleading instead of a complaint. And anyway, I got a call the next morning, and it said it was a doctor, and then I couldn't understand him, and I hung up, and later on it was somebody else, and finally he called, and he said, you're going to have to go up there and finish that case, that I'm sick. And so I said, go tell Judge Henderson that I'm sick, and you can argue that case. You can make the closing argument and argue it. So
had you tried any part of the case?
No, I had not been there at all. But as I said, I was familiar with it in that I had helped get it ready to go to trial, but I had not been in the courtroom. So I went up and told Judge Henderson, and he was an old judge there, and Prince, a fellow, and he'd been a friend of Taylor. All the judges are friends of his. So I told the other lawyers, I said, come on, let's go see the judge. And so we went in. Fred Wilson and Ferber Floyd were the other lawyers. And both of them very fine people. Fred's still living, Ferber's dead now. Anyway, we went in there, and I said, I had this call this morning. Mr. Taylor's sick, wants me to finish this argument. Old Henderson leaned up like this, and he had a great big bushy eyebrow, and he says, sick, huh? Sick, huh? and he laughed, and he says, well, how much time do you want? And I told him, I said, well, I need to read the medical depositions, and I need to talk to the clients, and I said, I'll need a little time. And he said, well, take as much time as you want, and then when you're ready, you come tell me in my office, and we'll go up. So that's what I did. I argued the case.
And before a jury?
Jury. I had to make the jury argument, yeah. So we won that case. We got a jury verdict for the plaintiff. Not because I argued it, because Taylor had put on good proof, I put it that way. But anyway, that was just one example. Another one I remember.
Did you ever learn what illness Mr. Taylor suffered from?
Yeah, I did.
And what was that?
Well, he had a little too much to drink and got in a little trouble with the law. And
were those doctors that called or jailers?
Well, I never did know for sure, but I guess what they were. Anyway, another time though, he incidentally during that time, the latter part of my time with him, he had a big antitrust case. He was suing Massey Ferguson Tractor Company, the big company up in Canada and this country too. And so he was traveling a great deal and gone. And so I was there in the office, and I had just a bulk of everything. But anyway, we had a case down in federal court, and this was early on too. This was early on, a federal court in Oxford, Mississippi. It was set for a Monday morning, and he said, I've got these depositions in Canada, and he said, I've got to do it. You'll have to go and handle that case. And he said, I'll let you have my car. You just take my car, and you have good transportation down there, and you can go. I said, well, Mr. Taylor, I said, you know, I never have been introduced to the federal court here. I can't go down. Oh, we'll take care of that. And he picked up the telephone, and he called Lloyd Johnson, who was a clerk. He said, is Judge Boyd in? He said, yeah. I said, tell him I want to see him. And he said, okay, come on over. And so went over there to Judge Boyd's office, and he said, I want to introduce this fellow as a lawyer so he can go down in the Northern District of Mississippi and try a case. And so that's how I was admitted to federal practice in Tennessee. So anyway, I went down there, and he said, and Taylor told me, he said, now I've got Bobby Smith, who's a lawyer from Boonville, Mississippi. So I've got Bobby Smith is going to handle this case, so you won't have any problem at all with it. So I said, okay. And so he said he's got reservations for both of you at the alumni house at Ole Miss and Sunday afternoon. I said, okay. So I went down there and I met Bobby Smith. And so Bobby said, well, he said, the first thing we need to do is find us a bootlegger. And I said, what? And he said, let's find a bootlegger and get a bottle of whiskey. And I said, well, that sounds like a good idea. And so we do that. And then we start talking about the case. And so sometime during the evening, when we were drinking and looking at the case, I said, when you got so-and-so on the stand, I said, you ought to kind of hammer on this. He said, wait a minute. He said, when I have him on the stand, I said, I'm not going to try this case. So all I'm going to do is help pick the jury. I said, well, Taylor said you were going to try the case. Oh, no. I said, you're going to try the case. So I had to stay up all night reading that thing, getting ready for the case the next morning. So anyway, that was another story with Taylor. But you learn a lot with a guy like that, you know what? I mean, you really do. And so I wouldn't give anything in the world for the time that I was with him, because I learned more then, I guess, than I have in any other place, really.
I know you developed a close relationship with Tom Bell Chevrolet in Memphis at about that time, and tell me about that.
Taylor represented, it was Union Chevrolet that later became Tom Bell Chevrolet. It's the same, Tom Bell was one of the officers of Union, and they just changed the name. And Taylor represented them, and after he had died, I had moved, incidentally, before then, I had decided I wanted to open my own office. And that was, I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit on it, but leading into that question, I guess I have to. But anyway, I decided I wanted to open my own office, and had arranged in the building just to get me a little office there in the Commerce Title Building. And the word got out. Ed Smith was up. He was up with McDonald Kuhn and one of my good friends. And so Mr. McDonald called me and said, "I want to talk to you." And so I went up there, and he said, "Are you leaving all that business?" He said, "We want to offer you a job." And he said, "We need somebody to try some lawsuits up here." They had a big litigation practice, and so anyway, he offered me more money than I was making, plus half of every fee that I made on my own. And at that time, I was starting to develop some of my own business. And so I thought about it, and I talked to Lucy, and I said, I think I ought to take that, which I did. I decided to do that instead of opening an office. And so anyway, I was there, and when Lowell died, Tom Bell was the president of the company then. He called me and he said, "Could you come by and let me talk to you a minute?" So I stopped by there, and he said, "Mr. Taylor's gone now," and said, "We need a lawyer, and we want to hire you to be our lawyer." And I said, "Well, man, I'm overwhelmed. I'll be happy to do it." And he said, "Well, go down there and pick you out a car, whatever kind of car you want." And I said, "Okay." And so I did. I picked out a Impala. I think it was that was a 61 Impala, I believe, or something like that, 62. Had everything on it. I wasn't used to that. And so anyway, that's the way that happened.
Pretty good perk, wasn't it?
It's pretty good. And then later on, from that time on, Lucy had a little car, and then about a year or so later, Tom said, he said, "I don't think Lucy ought to be driving that car." Said, "You just go get another car for her, see what she wants." And so I got another one, and we keep them about 5 or 6 months, and they'd call and say, "How many miles you got on that car?" And I said, "Oh, 3,000. Bring it on in then." Said, "We want to trade it, and we'll get you another one, whatever you want."
So you had 2 cars.
So I had brand new cars every 4 or 5 months, no repair bills, no car notes. And so when I went on the bench in 1982, I turned on both those cars in, and I had to buy 2 cars. and I didn't have any idea what cars cost at that time. So I had a revelation.
How long did you stay with the McDonald firm?
I was with McDonald, I guess, 4 years or so.
And what type of practice did you have?
Well, I was hired to try lawsuits up there, and that's what I did. Then I had developed some practice, real estate practice. Some friends of mine were builders, and I handled all their closing. And I'd close at night, and I'd make some money. And I will say this about Mr. McDonald too. He was a prince of a fellow. He never once, I'd turn in that money to Miss Pratt, the office manager, and turn it in, and he never once took half the fees all the time I was there. And even though that was a deal, he said no, he didn't want to do it. So anyway, but I stayed up there, and the way that we did in those days, they'd had jury call, and they had so many cases. They had represented so many insurance companies that they had to go to jury call, and then one of the young lawyers would go, and you'd come back, and then he'd go into Mr. Kuhn's office, Ed Kuhn, former ABA president, go in his office. And me and Ed Smith and Ed Kuhn were trying the lawsuits in. And we'd go in there, and they would say, "Well, here's a case of so-and-so and so-and-so. All right, Crawford, you take that. You take that. You take that. You take that." And we'd take those cases and just have a stack of them, and they'd set for trial, and maybe 2 cases set the same day and all that. It was really something else to keep up with, I tell you. And then you had to get it ready, and at this time, we didn't have discovery in the state courts, And so everything was done with what we had in the investigative file and what additional investigation you did, if you did any. And I usually tried to do some. I'd go out and talk to the witnesses, try my best to do that, the ones I could. And so it was quite a job in those days to do that. Now you could schedule a deposition, find out all these things, but we didn't have it at that time, and I put my hands back.
At some point, you thought about an association with Milloy, Leary, and Hendricks. And
Yeah, Malloy and Leary. And,
yes, sir.
Well, Ed Smith was real good friends with them, and I knew them too, but we weren't real good friends. And they had bought a lot down on Washington, and were building a building for a law office down there.
Now, who's doing this?
Malloy and Leary, and then Hendricks was with them too, and they started talking to me about coming down there, and I debated a long time about doing it. Finally, I decided I'd go ahead and do it. So I went down there, and I had a fourth interest in the building, which intrigued me more than anything. And I stayed there until, and Malloy decided after about a year or so, and Sam was a great guy, I liked him, but he decided he didn't like having the firm, and so he wanted to dissolve it. It suited me. I said, that's fine. So we just stayed there as separate lawyers with our own practice, and I had an associate I hired to help me because my practice had grown pretty good.
And who was that?
A.V. McDowell, and A.V. was with me when we formed the Thomason, Crawford, and Hendricks firm.
I believe you first met John Thomason while you were at the Leary, Hendricks, and Crawford firm.
No, I actually met him
Okay.
in law school. He was behind me a year or so, and he's from Memphis. And I remember I ran for president of the Student Bar Association, and Thomason was in the same legal fraternity with John Burnett, who was my opponent. And so he voted for John Burnett. And I said, well, you're a traitor. I said, I'm from Memphis, and you didn't vote for me. But he did anyway. He voted for John Burnett. And I lost the election, but I think by more than one vote, so it didn't make any difference. But anyway, but John finished school, and I was already in Memphis then. And in fact, I guess I was going off and came back. When he finished school, he went in the JAG, and he went to Germany, and finally came back to Memphis, and he got a job with a lawyer there, and at that time, I might say, I remember he was complaining about he wasn't paid anything either, even at that time, which was 4 or 5 years later than I was, I guess, and. So anyway, we became friends, and then I had a lawsuit. He went to work for Nelson Norval firm, which was a big insurance defense firm, and it's while I was with Taylor, and I had a lawsuit for an insurance company I represented, or Taylor did, a subrogation case, and his client, his State Farm had their coverage, and his client, the State Farm insured, ran into a parked car, which was my parked car, and he was drunk, DUI, and they wouldn't pay. They said they'd pay, but they weren't going to pay it what it cost to fix it or anything else. I said, well, we'll get punitive damages on that, and so I filed a lawsuit, and they kept telling me you can't get punitive damages on that case. So we tried that case and landed a jury. And got over and tried it, and I got the money plus the punitive damages. And Thomason, it was his first case,
oh, man.
And it killed him to this day. And I said, I whooped you on your first case, and so anyway, he did. But I think Woodrow Norval stayed in the courtroom with him, and probably deterred him from doing a real good job.
You sometime in '66. 67, you have a dinner, I believe, at the athletics club, with Lucy, and she makes some comment.
Oh yeah,
Tell
Lucy,
me about that.
Lucy and John's wife Sally and Lucy and the four of us we had dinner together at the athletic club one night, and Lucy just commented to just laugh. We were laughing and talking. She said, "Anytime you ever form another law firm, so I'm gonna pick you as a partner," or something like that. And nobody thought anything about it. So sometime after that, several months, I guess, John called me one day, and he said, "You remember that conversation we had?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember that." He said, "I want to talk to you about that." So it was on a Friday, and I said, "Well, I'll be in the office tomorrow morning." And so he said, "Well, let me come down in and talk to you." Well, he was with Nelson Norval, and I guess the name, Nelson Norval, Wilson, and Thomason, I guess was the name at that time. And they had a little problem. I think he had hired somebody as an associate, and they decided they didn't want to do it or something. Something happened. I don't remember all that. Anyway, he was very dissatisfied, and he said, "I want to talk to you about it." So we talked and went over my practice, and he wouldn't have any. He said, "I can't bring it, can't promise a thing." But we decided that we'd go be partners, and because I like John, and so we became partners, agreed to become partners. And Roy Hendricks was part owner of that building, was there by himself, and he does office practice. And I covered for him when he'd go on vacation and things. And I said, I hate to leave Roy here by himself. I said, "Do you mind if we ask him if he wants to go?" I said, "If he does, it's fine with me." So I like Roy, so we did that, and Roy said he wanted to go. So thus was born the law firm Thomason, Crawford, and Hendricks. And Thomason said, "We'll flip a coin to see between the two of us what the name would be." And I think I had one drink too many, and he won.
So 1967, you start the firm. Where's
Yeah.
your first office located?
100 North Main Building.
And what type of practice do you have?
Well, we had a nucleus of insurance clients. Roy had a lot of real estate clients, and I thought we did real well with it. We had one associate, AV, went with us.
A.V.
then.
McDowell?
Yeah, he went with us up there, and we had one associate and three of us, and we did pretty well. Then at the end of that first year, Al Harvey had been clerking for Supreme Court Justice Creason, and he wanted to come with us and agreed to do that. So we hired him, and he came up there, and during that time, sometime in there after he came, AV decided that he was going to leave and go on his own. No hard feelings, he just wanted to get on his own. And so we did that, and then had Al, and then we hired Kim Johnson next, and it just kept growing like that. We had some tough times, we had some good times. I remember one time, they called me, and of course I was never a business person. I never was a personnel person. And so I didn't want to know anything about, I said, all I want you to do is give me my money at the end of the month, and that's all I want to know about it. And so they would keep things from me. They'd buy things and all that, and they wouldn't do it. One day they called, they said, the bank had called, this was after we'd progressed to a point where we had an office manager. Mary Ann Clark, was she?
Yes, she
you
was.
You know Mary Ann?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And Mary Ann was our office manager, and the bank called Mary Ann and said we were overdrawn about $100,000 or something like that. It was a lot of money. And so she called John, and the first thing John said, Frank and Roy in town. And so anyway, it turned out it was a mistake. They got it straightened out. And so they laughed about it. They said, we didn't tell you about it because we knew you'd go crazy. So they didn't tell me till after it was over.
Well, you've got your practice up and going at Thomason, Crawford, and Hendricks, but your family is all up and going at that point. Tell me about your children.
Oh yeah, well they were growing just like weeds, and I had my oldest son Scott was going to Germantown. We moved out where I live now in 1963, and he was in probably the last year of grammar school then or something like that. And then he went on and finished there. And my second son, Frank Jr., or Bubba, as I call him, his mother refuses to call him that, but I call him that. Anyway, he went to school there at Germantown, and then in the 9th grade started at the Memphis University School. And then my daughter, Lucy Ann, the next one in age, she went to Germantown School for a while, and then went to Laurelwood School there in Memphis, a private school, and then went back and went to Overton High School, where she graduated. And Chip, my youngest one, the son, he went to MUS 7th grade on, and I think he repeated 2 years, 2 grades there, because he wouldn't study, and he didn't realize how much money it cost to do that. And finally, in the senior year, I said, buddy, I'm taking you out of there, and you're going to public school. And I put him in Ridgeway, and he had been, as I recall, I remember this, he was deficient at MUS in English, and he got over there to Ridgeway, and they put him in accelerated English. And so he stayed there for about 2 months or 3 months, and he came to me one day and he said, if I get a job and make some money, would you let me pay part of the tuition and go back to MUS? And I said, okay. And so I let him go back to MUS, which he did. Well, anyway, they're in Scott's in Memphis. He works for the grocery company Snooks. Chip works for Light, Gas, and Water. Neither one of them wanted to be lawyers. Lucy Ann is down in Tuscumbia. She went on and she left UT and went. She later got a degree at North Alabama, and she's working on a master's now down there. And then got to name all of them. Oh yeah,
Bubba.
Frank Jr. Bubba is a Baptist minister in Kingsport. He went to UT and finished. And while he was there, he started going to a Baptist church out there on Kingston Pike. We were Methodist. He grew up in the Methodist church, and then he went to the mission field in Brazil for 2 years, and determined at that time that he wanted to be a minister. And so he came back and went to seminary in Fort Worth, finished that, and then he. A couple of churches, and he ended up in Kingsport, and then he got his doctorate in Richmond about 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. So that's the children.
That's
they're
4
all
successful
kicking.
kids.
Huh?
How about grandchildren?
I have the preacher has 2, and one of them's a junior at East Tennessee State, and one's a junior in high school, and then Chip has the one that's 8 years old. And they moved. They just built a house out in Rossville in Fayette County, and he goes to Rossville Academy, Christian Academy there.
And do you have much time to see them now, or you're just too busy with your job?
Well, really, I see the youngest one. He comes to the farm. He loves coming up there, and so he comes to the farm, and I see him up there. But since Chip moved out away from Memphis, I don't see him like I used to.
Well, you mentioned the farm. You own a pretty sizable farm.
Well, and I use that term loosely when I say farm. It's 320 acres in round figures, but it's got a lake on it, about 25-acre lake, and I have about 3 cabins on there, and we go up there frequently. We're crazy about it, but my farming, it consists of bush hogging, cutting fields, and trying to keep it up. And I do plant a garden, and I planted 2 green fields this year, but no rain, so I may not have any greens. So that's the extent of the farm, but we're crazy about that place. Been going since 1968 in that place.
Well, when you formed Thomason, Crawford, and Hendricks, what was the philosophy of the firm?
Well, the philosophy was to provide quality legal services at a reasonable cost. That's exactly what we said. Quality legal services at a reasonable cost. And one thing that we said that we agreed upon was that we would not treat any associates the way we were treated when we came along. So we started out with a compensation plan of trying to be fair, that we would give everybody a decent draw and then charge back what they made, and we'd pay them the difference. Well, it turned out they weren't making it, and it would end up they would be owing us money at the end of every month. So we decided that's not working. So we took that out and had a straight salary plan from then on, and they didn't owe us any money. We never collected any money from anybody. But we were trying to do what we could to be the right thing, and which ended up does very well. Now their firm, John Thomason, I say that he was my partner, and we never had a disagreement in 15 years over anything that I can remember. I can't remember a single one, because he liked to run things, and I didn't like to run things. I just wanted to be a lawyer, and that's it. And so it worked out perfectly, and he did a marvelous job of organization, marvelous job of keeping everything in track. I mean, it was a good job, and he's responsible for the growth of that firm. It's a big firm now.
Tell me some of your highlights of your practice there, particularly from your early years, 67 to 75, as your practice began to develop.
Well, I had a lot of cases. I was in court a great deal, and fortunately for me, one client I had, an insurance company, wanted me to handle their cases out in the rural areas.
Which company was that?
It was MFA, which is now Shelter. They were just starting to come into Tennessee, and I was their first lawyer here, and it worked out that we had a very good relation. I knew the president and all the company, and it had grown a great deal, and so I handled all the cases in West Tennessee, and so I got to go to every small town and courthouse, and that was a delight to me. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the lawyers. I was always treated very well. I knew the judges there, and I look forward to going to all those places.
How did you find the country lawyers versus the city lawyers that you were so used to practicing with?
Well, I found that they were, for the most part, they were very competent lawyers, and they knew what they were doing, and they were very courteous, helpful. I mean, they didn't try to slip anything over on you. I never did have any what I call home cooking from any of those lawyers. I got along very well with them. I got beat, don't misunderstand me, but nevertheless, I thought they did it fairly, and I never did have any problem there. I will say I had one time, and luckily it was a witness to it. That, of course, he's dead now, Ray Bratcher. But I was up in one of the counties, and I won't even mention it, because this is a lawyer, it's an older lawyer there. He's dead now too. But I had a client. I had a black fellow that was a school teacher there in the county, but he had moved since the accident happened to Nashville, and so we were going to defend the case, and he came down there for the trial that day, and they had a bunch of cases. The grand jury had come in, and man, they had all kinds of cases in the rural area. But anyway, the lawyer, he said, we ought to settle the case. And I said, well, we've talked to you about it, and you want too much money. And went on. So he said, I'm not going to be able to try this case today. He said, I've got all these other cases. And I said, well, do you want to put the case off? He said, yeah, we'll just put it off. And I said, okay. Well, we were out in the hall talking, and old Ray Bratcher was standing right there by it. And so anyway, so we went back in the courtroom later on, and the grand jury had just finished reporting, and the judge said, all right, let's call this civil docket. So he called a civil docket, and they called that case, and the lawyer got up and he said, ready for trial. And I had already sent my man back to Nashville, because he told me we were going to continue. I said, well, I'm going to send him back to Nashville. And I said, wait a minute. And I said this. I told the judge. He said, well, the case is set. And he said he's ready. He said, we're going to have to go to trial. I said, okay. So I went to the telephone, and I called the company, and I said, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. And I told him exactly what happened. And and the guy up there, he said, go ahead and pay him what he wants. And he said, we'll remember it the next time. And we did.
And we did.
We did. But that happened. That's the only time in all the years I've practiced law that something like this happened. But Ray came over to me after. He said, I heard every bit of that conversation. And he says, no question about it. But anyway.
Well, about that time you began to try some cases, special judge, and tell me about that there in Circuit Court in Memphis.
Oh, well, in Memphis, I sat as a special judge in the Circuit Court for several judges for vacation purposes and sickness, and I really enjoyed it. I really liked the trial work, and I didn't like the domestic cases, and in fact, after a while, I said, now look, don't ask me to sit on the non-jury docket. I said, I'll handle the jury docket, but I don't want to handle the non-jury. So I did that, and that's where I really would like to have been a judge, was on the trial bench.
And why is that?
Well, I like the interplay with the lawyers and dealing with the people and all. It's just something I was familiar with. The appellate court, the only thing, reason why I was interested in the appellate court was the fact that they had what was then called a Missouri plan or the Tennessee plan, because I'm not a politician. I could not run for election. I would not try to do that in campaign, and I just knew that I'd never be a judge if that's what I had to do. So when the openers came in the appellate court, I was interested.
You had some comical things to happen in your years at Thomas and Crawford and Hendricks. Would you agree that humor was a big part of the day?
Humor was a big part. We had a lot of fun, yeah.
I know at one point John Thomason came up with what would become known as the hand signal memo. And would you tell the people about the hand signal memo, and particularly your response to it?
Well, John, as I said, was a great organizer, and he was very active in the American Bar Association. And one of the committees he was on came up with a set of hand signals to use in firms when you were somebody was on the telephone and you would go in their office. And they had different ones that they'd raise a hand up like this and say stop, or it's okay, come in, or it's private. And they had all kinds of hand signals. So he put a memo out, and this is very serious. He put a memo out to the firm about these hand signals and wanted to start using them. And he had the illustrations in there of all the hand signals. There's a memo from John Thomason to all lawyers in the firm. And so I got the memo and I looked at it and I thought, man, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I couldn't think of anything to do but reply. And so my reply was, I went to the photocopy machine and used my hand to give the great Hawaiian peace symbol.
The middle finger peace symbol.
And I said, in reply to your memo of so-and-so, bang. He didn't appreciate that. He didn't really appreciate it because he was very serious about that. But I thought it was funny. But we had a lot of fun at the firm. I would take a nap sometimes in the afternoon. My office was next to his, and they had ceilings like this ceiling here, that false ceilings. And for the longest time, I'd get in there and I'd be taking a nap on my couch, and I'd hear all this scratching and carrying on. I thought we had rats up there in the ceiling, and turned out that Thomason had a long coat hanger he'd put together, and he was standing in his office and scratching over there to wake me up. And that was just one of the things he did. And another time, I remember so well, I was over in trying a case over in circuit court, and I finished the case and went and argued. The jury had taken the case, and I was sitting out in the hall, and we had, but to digress a moment, to go back for the background, we had an associate with the firm, and he was appointed by the federal court to handle an appeal in the Sixth Circuit. And during the right after he was appointed, the Sixth Circuit entered a judgment dismissing the appeal, but he had written the prisoner and told him that he represented us, he represented him. And so anyway, on our stationery, so next thing I know, there's a lawsuit. I didn't know anything about this. A lawsuit was filed for about $1 million against me and Thomason and Hendricks by this prisoner. Well, I didn't know anything about it, and I'd finished that case over there, and so I was sitting there, and this guy came down the hall, and the deputy was sitting next to me, and this fellow whispered to him. He said, "Well, that's him right there." And so this fellow comes and says, "I'm a U.S. Marshal, so I have these papers. I'm going to serve you papers." Served me with $1 million lawsuit. And I said, "Good night." I said, "What is this? I never heard the names or anything else." I said, "Well, how'd you find out where I was?" He said, "Well, I thought you would be in the courtroom." Said, "Mr. Thomason, I just served him." And he said, "You'd be in there in the courtroom." And said, "Let's go in and give you these papers at the table." They said, "Be all right." Golly, he knew, boy, I'd jump through the hoop with that. But anyway, that's just the way we did. It was funny. We had a lot of fun.
You also had a billing system that you used for your files. And tell us about that.
Well, I never did in my practice with the other firms and up until we formed this firm. I never did have an hourly rate. We didn't do that. We just didn't do it. We charged for what work we had done, and generally charged at the end of the case if it was a defense case. And I'd go through the file and say, well, I filed pleadings and did this and did that, and have a bill. But they started using that time system, and everything. Boy, 1/10 of an hour for a telephone call, and this and that, and I never could keep up with that. I never did want to, really, and so I just, for the longest time, I didn't do that. And finally, toward the end, I started trying to dictate time slips, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do that. I was just an old guy, I couldn't do anything about it. So I had the old system, and I thought it was pretty good myself. We came up. I never had a client. All the time I was practicing, to my remembrance, I don't think I ever had a complaint about a bill. But the problem with that is I wasn't charging enough because my partners were really, they were on me all the time about that. I was not charging enough. I don't know what it was. I think UT ruined me on that. The professors I had up there, I remember they seemed to harp on the fact that if you were trying to make money, you were in the wrong profession, and you were supposed to do good instead of doing well. And I said, my goodness gracious, and it just did something to me because I never did make any money.
Well, in 1982, the firm celebrated its 15th anniversary at that time, and you have an opportunity to apply for a vacancy in the Tennessee Court of Appeals with the untimely death of Judge Watkins Jewell. And tell me what was going through your mind as you thought about applying and then the process itself.
Well, that was 1980.
Excuse me.
The Watkins Jewell, and I had mixed feelings. I had several mixed feelings. Some of them economic, and some of them personal feelings about leaving. The firm was like a family to me, and everything was for the firm, and I just felt bad about leaving, number one. But economically, it was really a bad situation because it was really going to be a cut. But I decided if I was ever going to do it, that was probably close to my last chance. So I did apply, and fortunately the selection committee named me as one of the three to submit to Governor Alexander, along with Judge Irvin Strauss and then Hewitt Tomlin, my good friend. And in fact, I think the governor was in Japan at the time, and he came back from Japan, and right after he came back, he named Tomlin as the judge.
That would be Governor Alexander?
Yeah, Governor Alexander, yes. And I remember that very well. And they called me from the paper that night when they did it, and I said, well, he made a good selection. I said, because Judge Tomlin is by far one of the best judges, the best lawyers I know, and will do an excellent job on the bench. And so, anyway, Tom Hull was his assistant. I think he was his counsel at the time, and he's the one that called me. And he said, well, don't let this keep you from applying again. He said, if there's another vacancy, you apply. I said, well, I'll certainly keep that in mind. So in '82, when Paul Summers and Kirby Mathern retired, there was two vacancies, so I applied again and was again named, submitted to the governor. And
how do you learn that you have been selected as the Court of Appeals judge?
Well, in that case, Bill Koch was in '82 was Governor Alexander's counsel, and he called me at the office and said the governor would like to talk to you. Could you come up here tomorrow? And so I said, well, yes, sir, I sure can. So I called Lucy and asked her to go with me, and so we went to Nashville, and we spent the night up there, and then the next day went over, and I walked through the Legislative Plaza, and saw my friend, the Attorney General, and he said, I know where you're going.
Was this Bill Leach?
Yeah. He said, I know where you're going. I said, where? And he said, well, you're going up there to be a judge. And so anyway, I went up there and talked to the governor, and he said, we talked about an hour, and he said, well, I want to offer you this position. Would you take it? And I said, yes, sir, I will. And so I did.
You were also waited there for a few minutes for the other. There was also another.
Yeah, he said he had an appointment with Alan Hires also to come up there, and so he said, would you wait till we could get some pictures? And which I did, and I used the time to call and tell Thomason that I was going to be leaving. And
what do you remember about that call?
I remember he said, well, man, he said, when are you coming back? And I said, we're going to leave shortly, drive back. He said, come on to your house, and we're having a party. He said, I'm getting it all done. And my daughter was working up there in the firm at the time, so he sent her and also my now secretary, or now executive administrative assistant, I should say, and sent them out there with one or two others to clean up the house and get ready. And then he ordered all this hors d'oeuvres and food and all the booze and everything else you can think of. And man, we had the neighborhood was crowded. You remember? I know
remember.
You remember that.
Yes, sir.
But it was quite a party that night. But anyway, it was sad. And Thomason had a good idea. He said, you know, with your leaving, said what we should do this summer, because the appointment would take effect in September. Said we should go and visit the clients and tell them, instead of writing a letter and saying I'm leaving. And so we did that. We went to New York, Los Angeles, St. Louis, Columbia, Missouri, Washington, D.C., someplace else.
Kansas City?
Kansas City, that's right, sure did. went to all those places where I had clients, and boy, they really appreciated it. They said they really did. We went up there and we took them out to dinner and said, we want to make an announcement to you and tell you, and had Harvey Johnson, Mitchell, or somebody. We split up and let some of them go, but Thomason went with me every time. But we had those some of those. So they're going to be here for you, and they really appreciated it.
As you look back on your years from 67 to 82 at Thomason, Crawford, and Hendricks, what are your reflections back on those years?
Oh, the happiest time I had. The happiest time. That was I guess I'd say that was really the best time of all in practice. Now, I've enjoyed being on the bench, but I remember Thomason, I don't guess when he was retired or something. I don't know, he was making a speech, and he said he had divided his time into 3 sections: BC, before Crawford, WC with Crawford, and AC after Crawford. And he said the best time of all was WC, and so I feel the same way.
Sure.
With him, I'm talking about.
Well, how about a break?
Yeah, if it's time.